Welcome. Thank you for joining us for today's CSCRS Research to Practice Bites session. We're going to be spending some time today learning about micromodes.org, a new surveillance system for micromobility fatalities. We'll be hearing from Kristin Podsiad today. Kristin is a graduate research assistant at the UNC Highway Safety Research Center, and she is also pursuing dual master's degrees at the UNC Gilling School of Global Public Health and the UNC Department of City and Regional Planning. So Kristin will talk about the work that went into this new website today. We'll also later be joined in the discussion period by Dr. Catherine Harmon, a research associate at UNC Highway Safety Research Center, who worked alongside Kristin and helped lead this project. If you aren't familiar with the Collaborative Sciences Center for Road Safety, CSCRS, our mission is to accelerate progress in reducing transportation-related injuries and fatalities by utilizing a systems approach, bringing perspectives from planning, engineering, public health, data science, and robotics to the road safety field. We are one of two national centers with a designated research focus on transportation safety. We bring together staff, faculty, and students from different UNC departments, as well as those at our partner institutions that you see listed here on this slide. I just want to get into a little bit of housekeeping before I turn things over to Kristin for the remainder of the presentation. As participants, you are all muted during the presentation today, but you do have the ability to submit questions in the Q&A pod that you'll see within the Zoom webinar platform. We're going to save some time at the end to go through some discussion questions and make sure you get those answered. Today's session is being recorded, and CSCRS will make the recording and the slides available later. And a helpful Zoom tip before we launch into the presentation, you can choose the speaker view option at the top of the Zoom screen to help optimize the screen of the current speaker. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and turn things over to Kristin Podsiad to go ahead and get started with the presentation today.
Thank you, Dan. Hi, everyone. I'm excited to join you today. As Dan mentioned, my name is Kristin Podsiad, and I'll be introducing you to micromodes.org, which is the first surveillance system for micromobility fatalities. And as we get started, I kind of just want to note that micromodes.org, the creation of this website, was really a collaborative effort with the project team, which included myself, Mike Van, Katie Harmon, Jonathan Weisenfeld, Graham Russell, and Laura Sant. And a little bit of an outline of what you can expect in the next 30-ish minutes. I'll start out with a project background covering why e-scooter fatalities, and then going over the project aims. Then we'll dive into the website, giving a tour of micromodes.org, and then we'll spend a little bit more time on the data explorer located on the website. And then I'll try to leave around 10 minutes at the end for questions, feedback, and general comments from you all. And throughout the presentation, I really invite you to use the Q&A at the bottom of your screen to capture your questions and any feedback that you want to share throughout the presentation. So diving into that project background, in the summer of 2019, funding started for the R26 project, exploring micromobility safety data and methods to improve injury surveillance. Then from 2018 to 2021, Dr. Harmon led an effort to abstract publicly available information relating to reported e-scooter fatalities. Then leading into 2021, we had funding for the R26 project concluded, and CSCRS continued support for the project activities. And that leads us to this past summer 2022, where the e-scooter fatality database is updated, a Tableau dashboard was created, and micromodes.org is launched. And looking towards the future, the e-scooter fatality database can be expected to be updated every 3 months, and we hope to incorporate other micromobility fatalities, such as e-bikes, into the dashboard. And so throughout the presentation, you may hear me referencing micromobility and e-scooter as terms. And so just from the start, I want to note that since this is an emerging area, there are maybe other definitions that you may hear that are different than what we used for this project and what we'll be using throughout this presentation. So just so we're on the same page throughout the webinar, when I use the word micromobility, I'm referring to devices that have 3 characteristics of being motorized or motor assisted, low speed, typically less than 20 miles per hour, and small in size, weighing less than 100 pounds. And when I use the word e-scooter, I'm referencing a device that looks like the image on the left side of this slide. They're typically less than 50 pounds, single rider, and run on an electric motor. So Bird and Lime may be some e-scooter sharing companies you're familiar with. And while micromodes.org is initially focused on e-scooters, we hope to expand it to include more, hopefully all micromobility devices that you see on this screen. And so the project aims, really we have 4 of them. The first being that to identify factors associated with e-scooter fatalities. Second, communicate the total number of deaths associated with e-scooters to researchers, decision makers, and the public. Third, engage the public in identifying fatalities associated with e-scooters to improve the database. And then fourth, to provide accessible information to prevent future e-scooter fatalities. And so from here, I'm just going to switch over to the website, transition my screen. And so as we dive into this overview of micromodes.org, you can type into your search bar, Google, any sort of search engine that you use. You can type in micromodes.org, and I really encourage you to join me on your own computers as we go over this tour, or to look it up after. So when you arrive at the site, you'll see this landing page that we're looking at right now. In the upper right-hand corner, you see that we have 4 kind of tabular options to choose from. We have first the Data Explorer, Key Resources, Reporting Form, and then that 4th one being the FAQs. And if we scroll down on this landing page, we see that we have that definition that I just shared with you all around what we used for our research on what is a micromode, and we included some images to help guide you in thinking about what you may see as you're walking around and what it might not be, but you might think it may be. And at the bottom, as I mentioned, there are many different specifications out there that may be slightly different. And so if you're interested in learning more about that, we've included some key resources at the bottom of the page. So if we scroll back up to the top, we're going to come back to that Data Explorer, but if we hit on that second tab and go into the key resources, we'll see here that we have first the option to download the database. So if you're interested in downloading the data and exploring that yourself, you have that option under key resources. And then we have that followed by our suggested citation for both the website and the database. And then below that, we have just some key resources that if you're interested in this topic, you may be interested in these resources and finding out more information on micromobility and also e-scooters. So I encourage you to check those out after this presentation if that's of interest. We'll come back to the reporting form as well, but if we navigate to that 4th option, the FAQs at the upper right-hand corner, and we click that, we see that we have some frequently asked questions. And again, we have the option for you to download the database under this tab as well. And then we also try to incorporate questions that you may have about the data, about the website, and our methodology for collecting this data. And so you can find that on the FAQs. And as we scroll to the bottom, here is an email. So if you feel that you have questions that aren't encompassed in this page, we encourage you to reach out at info@micromodes.org. And we would be happy to incorporate questions and answer your questions via that email. And so now we're going to go back up to that first tab, that Data Explorer tab. And when we come to this tab, we see that we have 2 options to choose from under Data Explorer. So we have the option to explore the e-scooter fatalities dashboard, which we'll be doing today. And then we have the second option of the global map of e-scooter fatalities crashes. And while we won't be getting into the depths of this mapping, I really encourage you, if you're interested in more of the granular data, to come back and check out the global map of e-scooter fatalities crashes. So we're going to click on this first one of the e-scooter fatalities dashboard. And as we open the dashboard uses data collected through publicly available reports, primarily media reports. And it really stemmed from some of my team members recognizing that nobody was collecting this data, and the fatality analysis reporting system, commonly known as FARS, was delayed significantly and excluded many of the fatalities through a narrow definition. And so our aim really was to analyze the media through news alerts and searches. And once we had a substantial amount of fatalities identified, we wanted to provide an engaging analysis of what we were finding in the data through dashboard. So that's where I came in, and I conducted a brief literature review and scan of existing dashboards to really inform the dashboard that you are seeing here today. And based on this research, we really focused not on showing every piece of data that we collected, but rather showing some of the key takeaways of what we were seeing in the data. And so when you come to the dashboard, you'll see that you have 7 tabs across the top to choose from. The first tab being a world map, the second being a US map, the third tab being fatality trends, then we have demographics, then we have mechanism, then we have motor vehicle involvement, and then finally that 7th tab, we have environmental conditions. And while we won't have the time today to go over every tab, go into the depths of every visualization that we have in this dashboard, I really encourage you to come back to it. But we will go over 2 of the tabs today. The first will dive into mechanism. And so when we click on that mechanism tab at the top, and we scroll down, we see that we're seeing an option to change geography. And we have the option between the world or the US geography. And we really hope to expand it to include other countries to choose from in the dropdown. But currently with our data, we have just under 200 fatalities reported in our database. And we hope as we expand it that we will be able to include other countries to provide more of an analysis. But at this moment, we just have it between the world and US. And so we can see that across the world, 85% of e-scooter fatalities involved in a collision and 15% involved a fall from the device. And we see that represented in that pie chart here. And then on the right with these bars, we can see that of that 85% that were involved in a collision, 76% were a collision with a motor vehicle. And we see that trend also replicated when we narrow it down to just US based. And as we go to the next tab, we'll go to environmental conditions and dive in a little bit more into the characteristics of incidents involving e-scooter fatalities. And again, we have the option to choose between US and world. And again, we hope to expand that to include more countries as we gather more data. And we have 3 kind of data analysis that we're looking at. We're looking at surrounding land use, we're looking at incident location, and we're also looking at time of day. So we see that for the US, surrounding land use, primarily with these incidents involving e-scooter fatalities, it's primarily surrounded by commercial land use. And then we see for incident location, we really narrowed it down between roadway or non-roadway. And then if it is in the roadway, we differentiated between whether there was a bike lane present or no bike lane present. And as you'll notice, I shortened it to BL for bike lane. And if you're sharing this with someone else or trying to explain it to someone else, it's also noted at the bottom that bike lane BL means bike lane is there, and no BL means that no bike lane is present. And so we can see through this visual that predominantly the incident location is in the roadway and no bike lane is present. And then if we scroll down to the bottom, looking at time of day, we see that over half of the incidents in the US at least are occurring in the night and early morning, which encompasses the time range of 9 p.m. to 5:59 a.m. And again, if you want a further breakdown of kind of the descriptions of what time we use to classify early morning and night versus morning, afternoon, evening, that's included here at the bottom for a little bit more nuance. And again, I just want to highlight, I really encourage you all to dive further into this dashboard. There's many other tabs to explore. And there's an option at the bottom. If you come down here, there's a little box with an arrow, and this is an option to download the dashboard. So if you're interested in exporting it into different formats, you do have that option at the bottom. And so we are going to scroll to the top. And finally, you've noticed me noting throughout the presentation that we have less than 200 fatalities currently identified, and we recognize that we have missing data, and we really want to invite you to submit any incidents you know about through our reporting form. And again, this is a navigation on the upper right hand of the website, and it's titled reporting form. And when you come to this web page, you'll see that we have a few required fields. And by filling out these fields, it really helps us to identify whether what you're sharing with us meets the criteria for inclusion. And so you'll fill out a few of these fields. And by doing this, by submitting these reports that you find that you don't feel are encapsulated in our database and our website, you're really helping to improve the quality of our system. And yeah, we thank you in advance for your support in the data collection to help improve this resource. And so this is kind of the overview of micromodes.org. I'm going to transition back to my slides. And so I just want to note some key takeaways of this process and in the creation of micromodes.org and the dashboard that I shared with you all. And that is to understand why you're creating and who you're creating for, to refine your data to highlight the key messages, to engage users in the process, and then to plan for multiple iterations. And really what you're seeing here today is a final product, but it took multiple iterations that took much time. It took dedication of workers' time. And so to just plan that into future projects that you may want to do related to this type of work. And then finally, we hope that we built an adaptable framework. So as we mentioned, a goal is to incorporate other micromobility fatalities. And we hope that this framework that we created will allow us to easily do that in the future. And so now as we move into the questions, feedback, and general comments, I just want to close on a note that, again, if you have any sort of feedback after this presentation, if you have questions, we really encourage you to reach out at info@micromodes.org, where we can get back to you and we can incorporate all your wonderful thoughts into our work. And if you're looking to reach out to me specifically, I have my email on the screen, and I'm sure that I'll be included in a follow-up email. And then finally, I just want to say that if you have e-scooter or other micromobility related photos with you or friends that you're willing to share, we really encourage you to upload those images to the PBIC image library, and I've included a link. And maybe you will find yourself featured on our webpage or on future presentations. So I thank you for your time and attention, and I look forward to hearing any questions or feedback that you all have.
Kristin, thanks so much. That was great. And we do have some discussion questions, so let's get into that. I do want to welcome Dr. Katie Harmon, who led this research and worked alongside Kristin to develop this. Katie will be sitting in on the discussion, and Katie, please chime in with responses to some of these questions if you have them. One of them early on, we had a bit of a clarification question. Can you clarify that electric bikes that are capable of more than 20 miles per hour are excluded from this tool? Is that correct?
Yes, I believe so, because we focused on low speed, so less than 20 miles per hour.
Okay, great. And in terms of what users can get out of this data, if they download the data, will they be able to drill down to locate any fatalities kind of in their specific area? And would they be able to search by things like state, county, zip codes, census tract, different geographic districts, things like that?
Yeah, so a lot of that more granular data, as I mentioned, was in that second resource, which I really didn't dive into, but that really has like a GIS map that you can get more of that locational data. At the moment, there's not, I don't believe, like specific like super specific by census tracker, things like that, but you can find a more nuanced location through that tool instead.
Okay. One other question that came in was asking about the data processing that you use to prevent double counting incidents that are in the database.
Yeah, so really that was having someone comb through each of the media reports that we were looking at, looking over the location. And if you download our data set, you can kind of see that we really focused on where it was occurring, the date, and capturing all of that information to prevent that from, like, that double count from happening.
I see. Let's see, the next question had to do with the location of the incident. Is there a way to distinguish between crashes that occurred on the street and on the sidewalk, or possibly a transition area? Is that level of granularity available?
Yes, in the data that you can download that's available, but for the purposes of our analysis, given just missing data and having more of like a key message, we focused on just being roadway and non-roadway.
Okay. I'm not sure how best, maybe both you and Katie can chime in on this one. One person mentions they've seen an increase in mobility chair fatalities. I'm only speculating that might be wheelchairs or other motorized devices such as that. They're asking why our team decided not to include these in this data.
Yeah, I think one main thing is just the availability of being able to search for e-scooter crashes. As I mentioned, we use public media reports. And so it was about availability of that data through public media reports is primarily why we focused on e-scooters first. And again, we hope to expand it to include other options. And Katie, I'm not sure if you want to chime in for anything further.
Okay, so I think that's a great response. We had sort of limited bandwidth. This arose out of a project that was looking specifically at standing electric scooters, and we're now hoping to expand to other devices. But right now, all of our data is only for standing electric scooters. It really wasn't so much a conscious decision of excluding other types. It was more just kind of what we were kind of funded to do. But these are really great. This is really great feedback because it informs where we're going to go in the future. So thank you.
A few more here that are coming in. One person asked if the data includes pedestrians or bicyclists that are killed in crashes with these e-scooter devices, or is it just reflecting the scooter rider themselves?
Yeah, so if you actually go to the fatality trends tab, it shows whether it was the e-scooter rider who was the fatality, or if it was a bystander, which, okay, we kind of use that broad term, but it really, if you download the database, again, there's a little bit more nuance in whether they're pedestrian, etc. And
do you have an estimate or no, maybe what the fraction of events in the data are from media reports versus police incident reports, or captured in crash data versus the sort of just gleaned from the media?
Yeah, I mean, all of this is publicly from public media reports in our database. I'm not sure whether, if they're also corroborated via those other methods that you mentioned. I'm not sure, Katie, if you have any more clarity on that.
Yeah, we actually start by identifying, when we first started this project, there was no codes in FARS that indicated an e-scooter fatality. That has since changed. So one thing that we are doing is validating our data in FARS. When we were able to do that, and we do actually compare what sort of data elements we're getting from the media sources to what we find in FARS. However, if there is no FARS for global events, happening in other countries, also FARS does not include these individuals that are killed when they're struck by an e-scooter. It also doesn't include events where the riders are killed when there is no motor vehicle involved. So all those events, those also generally don't have a crash report as well. But we don't do any sort of trying to dig up the crash reports for these events because that would be kind of a little bit more resource intensive than what we've been funded to do so far.
Okay. And a couple other questions here. Is it possible to distinguish between e-scooters that are privately owned versus those that are managed and belong to a fleet or a company such as one of the big operators?
I don't believe that we included that in our data. That was something that we initially, I know we started reporting, but it wasn't a key focus of our research and data collection. So Katie, you might correct me if I'm remembering wrong, but
yeah, we do collect it where we can. What we don't do is we don't collect on, like, for example, of which like companies are involved. So we do, if it's noted that it's privately owned, we do have that in our data, not so much on in the dashboard. What we don't have is whether it involved, like, say, like a Lime e-scooter versus a Bird e-scooter.
Okay.
But that's becoming increasingly difficult because that information isn't always reported. However, the vast majority of events that we include information for did involve the ride shares, although there are several events that did involve private e-scooters.
Okay, great. Some more questions here. Some of these might be good suggestions for considerations for things to add down the line if they don't already, but let's find out. Do you have plans to incorporate AIS injury levels into the database? And maybe when you answer that one, maybe you can help us with the abbreviation for AIS for those who are not familiar.
Yeah,
well, these people are dead, so they're they're
all
fatalities.
That's right. There you go. Okay.
We actually talked about AIS, which is the abbreviated injury score, is for people, like, for people who are injured, some of whom die, some of whom do not. We had a conversation about including non-fatal injuries as part of our database, but because of concerns about personal information, we decided that for now, we're just going to stick with fatalities.
Okay.
And so we don't have, unless we decide to shift gears and include non-fatal injuries, we won't probably incorporate AIS scores into the data that we have.
Great. I wanted to we have just enough time, I think, for a final question, kind of looking forward with this platform and the data that you've compiled. What do you see as some really ripe areas for using this data to answer future research questions, things that maybe we still want to explore more of? There's that part of the question, and then another part might be just efforts you might take to kind of continue to improve the data collection moving forward. Any steps that you think would be valuable there?
Yeah, well, I think some people already through their questions have raised some great ideas for future research, and really that's what we hope, is that this tracking can hopefully inform future diving into the granularity of these fatalities, and really with the overall goal of preventing future e-scooter fatalities. And in terms of improving the database, we definitely, as we mentioned, want to expand to include other micromobility fatalities. And another thing that we're trying to do, which we've noted in our FAQs as well, is primarily we notice that we are using English language media sources, and we really want to expand that to include other languages, to include further fatalities that we may be missing on a world scale. And so that's another option, that if you have, the ability to provide us with different language search terms that we can use to find these e-scooter fatalities, we welcome you to share that at info@micromodes.org as well, to help us really expand that database to encompass as many as we can.
Awesome. And Katie, any final plugs for the research question, maybe moving forward, what we could use this for?
Well, first of all, Kristin covered almost everything I'd want to add. That was fantastic. The only thing I'd add is, like, I know that there are other groups out there that have been documenting e-scooter fatalities as well as e-bike fatalities. Please compare what you have in our data system. We know that it's not perfect. We know that we're missing some, and let us know what we are missing. Please do not hesitate we're really hoping to crowdsource this information. So please don't hesitate to send us stuff. We just ask that it's publicly available information, because we don't have the capacity. We are using Tableau Public, so we don't have the capacity to handle sensitive data at this time.
Thank you both. That was great. I think we hit most of the questions, hopefully. If you still want to follow up, our contact information is here on this material. We'll be sending the recording and the slides out to you separately. Stay tuned for information about our next webinar. We will be back in September. So keep an eye in your inbox for details about that session, how you can sign up. Just another big thank you to Kristin, Podsiad, and Dr. Katie Harmon for joining us today and leading us through this new website. We hope you all will go use it and let us know how we can improve it in the future. And we'll see you next month. Thanks, everybody.